If you've never been hungry enough to cry, you wouldn't understand Sonia's silence. She stood near the entrance of Maple Avenue Plaza, barefoot, her oversized sweater swallowing her tiny frame, her bald head shining under the rising sun. The city didn't see her. People walked past like she wasn't even there. Eyes forward, phones in hand, faces blank. But Sonia didn't need everyone. She just needed one person to stop. Her stomach had been empty for 2 days. Her legs felt like water. Her vision blurred every time she stood too long. But still, she waited, breathing slow, holding on to a thin thread of hope. Then she saw him. Not a celebrity, not a man in a fancy suit. Just a tall, quiet man in a hoodie and jeans, walking alone with a backpack slung over one shoulder. No bodyguards, no noise, just calm steps and a peaceful look. She didn't know his name, but something in her spirit told her he was different. As he passed, she gathered the last bit of strength in her hands and reached out, her fingers trembling. "Please," she whispered, tugging his sleeve. He stopped. She looked up at him, eyes sunken but sharp, full of fear and fire. Her voice cracked as she said it again. "Sir, please, I need help. Not money, not food. Help, real help." The man's name was David Cole, though Sonia didn't know that. No one ever guessed who he really was. A billionaire in simple clothes, founder of one of the world's biggest health tech companies. A man who once grew up in pain and swore he'd never let others suffer alone. David looked at her. Bald head, no eyebrows, dry skin. Signs he recognized instantly. Chemotherapy, cancer. His chest tightened. "What's your name?" he asked gently. But before she could answer, a harsh voice cut through the air. "Hey! Hey! Get away from him!" They both turned. A store owner stormed toward them from across the sidewalk. "She's been hanging around all week, scaring customers. You don't need this kind of trouble, sir." Sonia's lips trembled. She backed away slowly. David raised a hand. "She wasn't bothering me." "She always says that," the man snapped. "Begging's begging." Sonia didn't wait for another word. She turned and disappeared into the crowd, weaving between legs and bags, slipping away like she had 1,000 times before. David stood there, frozen, watching her go. Hours later, he sat alone in his high-rise apartment, the city lights painting his window with gold. But all he could see was her face, the way she looked at him, like she wanted to live but didn't know how to ask for permission. He reached for his phone and called his assistant. "Thomas," he said, voice low. "I need you to find someone." There was silence on the other end. David closed his eyes and added, "She's sick. A kid, bald, looks like she's been through hell. She touched my arm this morning near Maple Avenue." "All right," Thomas replied. "What should I do if I find her?" David's jaw clenched. "Tell her. Someone's finally listening." The wind carried the cold. It brushed past Sonia's bare legs as she sat on a rusted bench in the far corner of Greenwood Park. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her stomach, which had stopped growling and now only throbbed. She had been there for hours, silent, still, shrinking. People passed by with headphones in, coffee in hand, smiles on faces. A couple even stopped nearby for a picture under the cherry blossom tree. No one noticed her. No one asked. But Sonia didn't cry anymore. She couldn't waste tears. She leaned her head against the back of the bench and let her eyes drift up. The clouds were moving. They always moved. Fast. Like time. Like people. Like her mother. Her mother used to say, "You are stronger than your pain." That was before the hospital visits, before the vomiting, before the bald patches, before the empty casket. They never found her mother's body, just a doctor's file and a trembling nurse with tears in her eyes. "Late-stage lymphoma," she'd said. She was gone before she hit the ground. And now Sonia was dying the same way, quietly, forgotten, on a bench. Her fingers were numb, her back ached, her body had started shaking an hour ago and now it wouldn't stop. But the worst pain wasn't the cancer. It was that she had asked for help, and still no one came. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She couldn't remember the last time she drank clean water. Her stomach had given up. Her eyes stung. She was disappearing, and the world didn't even blink. She slowly closed her eyes. If this was the end, she just wanted it to be quiet. At the edge of the park, Thomas Adeyemi held up his phone, scanning the area. His neatly pressed shirt was damp from sweat, and his heart was racing. "She's close," he muttered into his earpiece. "David, I think I've got her. That same hoodie she wore yesterday was spotted near this park by one of the vendors." "Don't stop until you find her," David's voice replied firmly. "Don't let her disappear again." Thomas ran past a playground, eyes darting from tree to tree, bench to bench, and then he saw her, slumped on the far bench, motionless, like a rag doll someone had forgotten. "Sonia," he called, slowing his steps. No answer. He jogged over, kneeling in front of her. "Sonia, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered weakly. She tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. Hey, don't sleep, all right?" Thomas said, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around her. "I've got you. You're okay now." He reached for his phone. "I found her," he told David. "She's barely responsive. I'm calling an ambulance now." He placed the call, gave the location, and within minutes, flashing red lights lit up the corner of the park. Paramedics rushed in. Sonia was lifted gently onto a stretcher. Her pulse was faint, her breathing shallow. As the doors slammed shut and the siren wailed to life, Thomas climbed into the back of the ambulance, holding her hand as her head rolled weakly to the side. "You're gonna be okay," he said quietly. "You just met the one person who doesn't give up." At Greenwood Memorial Hospital, nurses and doctors crowded around as Sonia was rushed in. One nurse looked up at Thomas. "Does she have any guardian?" He replied, "She does now." Greenwood Memorial was still humming with activity when David stepped through the side entrance. No flashing cameras, no security entourage, just a man in dark jeans and a quiet face. His baseball cap was pulled low, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the hallway until he spotted Thomas, standing outside a glass room, arms folded, worry all over his face. "She's in there," Thomas said as David approached. David looked through the window. Sonia lay still on the hospital bed, her face pale against the white pillow. Wires connected her to beeping monitors. Her chest moved in shallow, uneven breaths. A doctor stood beside her, flipping through a chart. David nodded at him. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" The doctor stepped out. "Are you her guardian?" "No," David said, "but I'm the one who's going to make sure she lives." The doctor blinked, slightly confused. "All right. Well, her condition is serious." I assumed. "She's severely undernourished, dehydrated, and immunocompromised. Advanced stage lymphoma. Judging by the progression, she's had no consistent treatment in months, if ever." David's jaw tightened. "We've started fluids and antibiotics," the doctor continued. "But if she doesn't begin real treatment immediately..." He didn't finish the sentence. David already knew how it ended. He nodded. "Admit her under the private wing. I want a full oncology team on her case. Whatever she needs, do it." "Sir, the costs..." "I didn't ask what it costs," David interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "I said do whatever it takes." The doctor nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, sir." David turned back to the glass. She looked smaller now, like a shadow of a life waiting to be noticed. He hadn't stood in a hospital hallway like this since he was 10. The room had been cold then too, machines beeping, nurses whispering. But that time it was his mother lying in the bed. She had tried to smile as he walked in, her head wrapped in a scarf, her fingers trembling as she reached for his hand. "I'll be fine, baby," she'd whispered. She wasn't. The cancer had eaten her in weeks. His father never visited. The bills stacked up. The doctors stopped trying, and little David sat alone in a waiting room with vending machine snacks and no one to hold him. He never forgot the sound of the monitor going flat. He never forgot the silence afterward. That day, he promised himself something. If I ever have power, no one will be left to die alone like she did. Now, years later, the boy who once sat helpless in a chair was the man who owned half the hospital's advanced equipment. But it wasn't enough. Not until that girl in the hoodie opened her mouth and asked, "Please, I need help." Inside the room, nurses moved with practiced urgency. IV bags hung, monitors clicked on. A specialist arrived with her scan reports. The air shifted. Hope had entered. David watched, unmoving. "She's just a kid," he whispered to himself. "She didn't deserve this." Thomas stood beside him. "You sure you want to do this?" David didn't take his eyes off her. "Yes," he said. "She matters." That night, Sonia's pulse was steady. Her skin warmed. Her body began responding. The storm had not passed, but for the first time in a long time, she was no longer fighting alone. The next morning, Miss Abigail arrived at the hospital, her face tired, her hands calloused from years of unpaid love. As she stepped into the room and saw Sonia hooked up to real care, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Who did this?" The nurse smiled. "She has a guardian angel, that's all we know." The sun was barely up when Miss Abigail stepped off the bus and hurried through the front entrance of Greenwood Memorial Hospital, clutching a worn handbag to her chest. Her long skirt brushed the floor with every rushed step, her scarf slightly crooked from the breeze that had followed her in. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even sat down since the phone call. "Sonia is here," the nurse had said.
She collapsed. But she's stable now. Stable. That word didn't mean much to someone who'd seen too many children fade from sickness and sorrow, but it was better than gone. When Miss Abigail reached the private wing and walked into the room, she stopped cold. Sonia was there, resting beneath clean white sheets, her face a little less pale, her chest rising steadily. For a moment, Miss Abigail just stood there, breathing. Then her knees buckled slightly and she sat beside the bed, tears falling before she could stop them. "Oh, my child," she whispered, brushing a strand of Sonia's short fuzz of hair. "What did they do to you?" Sonia didn't wake, but her hand twitched and found Miss Abigail's. She held on. A nurse stepped into the room. "Are you Miss Abigail?" "Yes," she said quickly, standing. "I run the children's home where Sonia lives." The nurse smiled gently. "She's in good hands now. Someone's covering all her treatment." Miss Abigail blinked. "Who?" "We don't know. No name. But whoever he is, he saved her life." That afternoon, David stood across the street from a narrow two-story building with peeling paint and crooked signage. Bright Shelter Children's Home. He didn't approach right away. He watched. A child with shoes too big swept leaves off the front porch. Another pushed a broken tricycle across a cracked sidewalk. The fence had holes. The windows were taped together. And the laughter, what little there was, carried the weight of kids who had learned to laugh through empty stomachs. David's eyes moved slowly across the building. This wasn't just poverty. It was a forgotten place. He slipped on sunglasses and crossed the street. Inside, Miss Abigail was scolding two boys for fighting over a single sandwich. She stopped when she saw David. "Can I help you, sir?" He introduced himself as a volunteer, just a man curious about donation opportunities. Miss Abigail sighed. "We don't get many visitors." He walked through the hallway, carefully. 3 children slept on a mattress meant for one. The kitchen had a single working burner. The walls smelled faintly of bleach and old sadness. But the children, they still smiled, still hugged her, still called her Mama Abby like she was all the family they had left. That evening, David sat in his apartment, scrolling through the photos Thomas had taken during their quiet visit. He saw the mold on the walls, the busted plumbing, the children in threadbare clothes. He stared at a picture of a little girl sitting in a corner, clutching a paper doll with no hair drawn on it, like Sonia. He made the call. "Get me 3 renovation contractors, discreet ones." "Yes, sir," Thomas replied. "And Thomas?" "Yes?" "This is going to be the best orphanage in the country." 3 nights later, while Miss Abigail tucked the children into bed, a quiet team arrived outside Bright Shelter with clipboards and tool bags. She opened the door, startled. One man smiled politely and said, "We've been hired to make this place shine." Sunlight spilled gently through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the hospital room floor. For the first time in days, Sonia stirred. She blinked slowly, her eyelids heavy like stones, her body weak but no longer burning with pain. The air felt cleaner, softer. The sheets were warm, The smell of medicine hung in the air, but it wasn't harsh. It was comforting, almost. She tried to sit up. A nurse noticed instantly and rushed over. "Easy, sweetheart. You've just woken up." Sonia's voice was barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're at Greenwood Memorial," the nurse said gently. "You collapsed in the park, but you're safe now." Sonia's eyes searched the room, unsure whether to believe it. Safe was a word she'd learned not to trust. Later that afternoon, when the nurse had helped her eat a few bites of soft rice and fruit, a soft knock came at the door. Sonia looked up. A man stepped in, tall, calm, wearing jeans and a sweater. His face was kind, his voice even kinder. "Hey," he said. "Mind if I sit?" She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat. Not too close, not too far. "I'm David," he said simply. Sonia blinked slowly. "Doctor?" He smiled slightly. "No, just someone who heard you needed help." She stared at him for a long moment. Her mind was foggy, but something about him made her shoulders ease, just a little. Did you bring me here?" she asked. David nodded. "Let's just say I was in the right place at the right time." Sonia's eyes dropped to her hands. Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't have." "Why not? I'm not worth it." David didn't speak right away. He let the silence settle. "Who told you that?" he asked finally. Sonia shrugged. "People don't need to say it. You just learn it. When they walk past you. When they pretend you're not coughing or shaking or sleeping on cold benches." David leaned back in the chair, arms resting on his knees. "You're here now," he said. "And you don't have to be invisible anymore." For the next hour, Sonia talked, slowly at first, then faster. She told him about the day her mother died, the nights at the orphanage when the cold made her toes turn blue, the ache in her bones, the sound of other children coughing in their sleep, the time she walked 3 hours just to ask for help, only to be chased away with a broom. She didn't cry. She was too tired for tears. David didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just listened, his expression never changing, his hands never twitching like he wanted to fix her. That's what made her feel safe. He wasn't there to save her. He was there to see her. When she finished speaking, her voice dry and slow, he reached into his bag and pulled out something unexpected. A worn paperback book. "I heard you like to read," he said. She blinked. "How did you know?" He smiled. "Lucky guess." She reached for the book and ran her fingers along the cover. "I used to read everything," she said softly, before the words started looking like water. David stood. "You'll get your strength back, 1 page at a time." Then he pulled out a small paper bag and placed it beside her. She opened it and gasped. Grapes. A full bunch, fresh, cold, and glistening. "Eat them slow," he said with a wink. "They're sweeter that way." Sonia looked at the fruit, the book, and then the man now standing by the door. "Will you come back?" "Every day," he promised. That evening, a nurse walked into the room and paused when she saw Sonia staring at the window, her eyes brighter than before. "What's that look for?" the nurse asked playfully. Sonia didn't say anything. She just smiled. The first real one in months. Back at the orphanage, hammers echoed through the halls. New walls, new paint, new life. And outside Sonia's hospital room, David made another quiet call. Get her more books and sketch pads, whatever she needs to feel alive again. The morning air inside Greenwood Memorial was still and clean. Sonia sat up in her bed, pale but more alert. A small stack of books rested beside her pillow, most with bookmarks poking out at odd angles. Her favorite was a collection of short poems, faded at the edges but rich in stories that made her feel seen. That day, her nurse came in with a gentle smile and fresh sheets. "Big day today, sweetheart." Sonia blinked. "What day?" "Dr. Marvy's coming to see you." Sonia's brow furrowed. "The surgeon?" The nurse nodded. "One of the best, and he's here just for you." In another part of the hospital,
David stood quietly in the hallway, arms crossed as he listened to Dr. Marvey review Sonia's chart. "She's been lucky," the doctor said. "Late-stage lymphoma like this, with no treatment for months, most don't make it past this point." David's jaw clenched slightly. "She's still here?" "Yes," Dr. Marvey said, nodding. "She is, and we're going to do everything we can. I want to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more the disease takes." David nodded. "Whatever she needs, equipment, medicine, recovery time, you'll have it. I'll cover it all." "Of course," the doctor said. "She's scheduled for preliminary prep tomorrow morning. We'll operate within 72 hours. David paused for a moment, then asked, "Will she survive it?" Dr. Marvey met his eyes. "She's a fighter. If she makes it through surgery, she has a real chance." Back in Sonia's room, she looked out the window, hands folded on her lap. She didn't know how to feel. Excited? Terrified? Hopeful? She hadn't expected to live long enough to get a second chance. When David entered, she gave him a faint smile. "You're here," she said softly. "Of course," he replied, sitting beside her. "I heard you met Dr. Marvey." Sonia nodded. "He's serious. He's also brilliant." She looked down at her lap. "Will I make it?" David didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the bag he brought and handed her something new, a small silver pendant on a thin chain. "Something to hold on to," he said. Sonia took it slowly, tears rising to her eyes. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." While Sonia was prepped for scans and early evaluations, Thomas was already working behind the scenes. At David's direction, he had hired a discreet team of renovators and child psychologists. He'd reached out to local artists to help decorate the orphanage with vibrant murals. Books were being delivered in crates. Engineers were evaluating the old building's plumbing and electrical system. Fresh bedding, school supplies, medicine, all arranged. Every detail mattered. David didn't want Bright Shelter to just survive. He wanted it to be reborn one night, after Sonia had finally fallen asleep, her pendant clutched in one hand. David stood by her window, watching the city twinkle in the distance. He pulled out his phone and called Thomas. "Update me." "The new heating system is being installed," Thomas said. "Kitchen equipment is on its way. We're replacing all the windows too." David nodded to himself. "Good. What should I tell the press?" Thomas asked cautiously. "Nothing. They're starting to notice your visits here." David looked over his shoulder at Sonia. "Let them wonder," he said. "This isn't for them." As David left the hospital room that night, Sonia stirred slightly in her sleep. A soft smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and for the first time in years, she dreamed of tomorrow. Time didn't stop inside the hospital, but for Sonia, it began to move differently. She no longer counted the hours by the rumble of hunger or the ache in her bones. She counted them by books, by visits, by the sound of quiet laughter shared between her and David at the edge of her hospital bed. In 2 weeks, the change in her was undeniable. Her cheeks no longer looked hollow. Her fingers, though still thin, held books with steadier grip. Her voice, once barely audible, had grown firm. Hope, once something distant and cruel, was now folding itself into the corners of her smile. And her hair, to everyone's quiet amazement, had begun to return. Just soft fuzz for now, but enough to make her run a finger across her scalp with wonder. "They said it would take longer," she whispered one morning. David, sitting by the window with a book in his lap, looked over and smiled. "Maybe you're just faster than most." Sonia grinned. "Maybe I'm magic." I wouldn't doubt it. Their days followed a quiet rhythm. David always came late in the morning, when the sun peeked through the windows and the nurses were done with their checks. Sometimes he read aloud to her. Old adventure books, mystery novels, even fairy tales she never heard as a child. Other times they simply sat in silence, trading stories. She told him about the kids at Bright Shelter, about Ava, who could sing but never did, and Moses, who'd once fixed a broken watch with a safety pin, and Miss Abigail, who gave up everything to raise children who weren't her own. David listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole being. No pity, just presence. In return, he told her small pieces of his life. "I used to be invisible too," he said once. "Really?"
she asked, skeptical. He nodded. Not because I was sick, but because people only saw what they wanted to. Sonia tilted her head. But now they see you? David looked at her for a long moment. Now, I don't care if they do. The wall beside Sonia's bed had changed too. Where once it was bare, now it held drawings, sketches Sonia had made with crayons and pencils Thomas delivered in a box one afternoon. Pictures of trees, a bright sun, a crooked house, children laughing in the grass, and in the center, a tall figure in a hoodie, holding a book. I drew you, she said, handing David the sketch one afternoon. He looked at it and smiled. I'm honored, she laughed. You don't even know what you look like. I guess I do now. By the third week, the doctors began to whisper with cautious optimism. She's responding faster than we expected. She might qualify for discharge soon. She's strong. But strength didn't erase the question that lived quietly in Sonia's heart. What comes after this? Where would she go? What if this new peace was just a borrowed dream? One evening, as David stood to leave, she reached for his sleeve. Will I see you again? She asked softly. David looked at her, steady and calm. You mean tomorrow? She shook her head. No, I mean when I leave. There was a pause. David studied her face, eyes wide, brave but scared underneath. He walked back to her side, knelt down, and looked her in the eye. You'll see me, he said, as long as you want to. Sonia didn't answer right away. She just nodded, and for a moment her fingers clung to his like a child, afraid to let go of something too good to be true. That night, a tabloid photo surfaced. David Cole spotted leaving Greenwood Memorial. The headlines screamed, "Billionaire secretly funding sick girls' treatment." And in her hospital bed, Sonia picked up the newspaper and froze. Sonia had never seen her name printed in bold letters before, not on paper, not on a screen, not anywhere. But there it was, plastered across the front page of a morning tabloid delivered by a chatty nurse who hadn't looked twice before placing it on the table beside her lunch tray. Billionaire saves dying girl in secret. David Cole spotted visiting Greenwood Memorial. Sources say mystery patient is a young orphan with cancer. Insiders reveal he's also renovating her orphanage behind the scenes. Her hand froze above her food. Her heart began to pound. She stared at the blurry photo on the page, a man walking out of the hospital in a hoodie and jeans. Casual, familiar, hers, David. The sound in the room seemed to drain. Suddenly the books he brought, the pendant around her neck, the snacks, the comfort, the drawings, the sketch pads, everything began to rearrange in her mind. He was David Cole. Not just David, the kind man who read her stories. Not just David who listened without trying to fix her. But David Cole, the billionaire tech genius she had seen in the corner of magazines before, the one Miss Abigail once described as too powerful to understand people like us. And he had been sitting beside her bed, every single day, without a word. She didn't know how long she sat there, her lunch untouched, her eyes unfocused. A quiet knock came at the door. Then it opened. Hey, David said softly, stepping inside with a small bag in hand. I brought... He stopped. The silence met him halfway. Sonia was sitting up, the newspaper folded neatly beside her on the tray. David followed her gaze, and he understood instantly. She didn't say anything for a while. She just looked at him, the man she had trusted with her stories, her drawings, her fears, her hope, and suddenly her voice returned, but not in anger, just quiet confusion. You lied to me. David exhaled slowly. I didn't lie. You didn't tell the truth either. He stepped closer, but she didn't reach for him like she used to. I didn't want you to see that part of me, he said gently. Why? Because the world treats people differently when they know who I am. They become careful, fake. But you were real. You talked to me like I was just a man. Her lips trembled. You were, until you weren't. David sat down slowly. I never meant to hurt you, Sonia. I know, she whispered. But it still does. She turned her face to the window. The sun was shining.
but the warmth didn't reach her this time. He watched her in silence, knowing no apology would be enough. Not right now. "Do you think I would have treated you differently?" she asked, still facing away. "No," he replied softly. "But I would have." That made her look back at him. "What?" David's voice broke just a little. "If I had walked in here as David Cole, the billionaire, I would have treated you like a project, like something to fix, not a person to know." Sonia stared at him, unsure how to hold that truth. She wasn't angry. She wasn't grateful. She was just hurt. Because when someone lets you feel safe, the smallest crack feels like betrayal. Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked finally, her voice low but sharp. David opened his mouth, but for once he had no answer. Not one she could believe yet. That evening, a hospital administrator stopped by Sonia's room with paperwork. "There's talk of transferring you," he said. "A new facility, a more permanent place." Sonia stared at the window, her voice flat. "I don't want a new place. I just want the truth." The next morning, Sonia sat in bed, staring at the hospital wall. The drawings were still taped there, her sketches of suns and trees and laughing children. But they looked different now, farther away, like they belonged to someone braver. David entered quietly. He didn't bring a gift this time. No snacks, no books, just honesty. "I saw the news," she said softly without looking at him. He nodded. So did the rest of the world. There was a pause. Then he sat beside her, his voice lower than usual. "I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. You didn't think I could handle it?" "No," he said quickly. "I didn't want you to see money. I wanted you to see me." Sonia finally looked at him, her eyes rimmed with something too heavy for tears. "But now I can't unsee it. I can't stop thinking about how you live in a penthouse while I grew up sharing a toothbrush. How you eat dinner in silence while we scraped for leftovers and called it soup." David winced. "I didn't mean to make you feel small." "You didn't," she said. "The truth did." The door knocked. A woman entered, neatly dressed, with a clipboard in hand and a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Sonia. I'm from Child Services," she said. "We're reviewing your case. Since your condition is improving, we're arranging for long-term placement. There's a residential youth center that could—" Sonia cut in. "Is it like Bright Shelter?" The woman hesitated. "It's different, more structured, government-run." Sonia felt her throat tighten. "Can I stay with Miss Abigail?" "She's not a licensed foster caregiver," the woman said gently. "You'll have your own room, trained counselors. But no one who knows me," Sonia whispered. The woman glanced at David. "We're still reviewing options, but I wanted to prepare you." When she left, the silence in the room returned, louder than ever. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and the hallway fell quiet, Sonia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could still feel the weight of that woman's clipboard. A placement. A center. No matter how much she healed, the world still wanted to file her into a box and move on. She turned her head toward the window, moonlight pooling across the floor. David cared. She believed that. But even with all his power, even with all his promises, she still felt like a visitor in her own life. So she made a decision. She got up, quietly pulling on the oversized hoodie David had once brought her, the sleeves still too long for her arms. She tucked the pendant under her shirt. She took one last look at her sketches, her books, her grapes on the nightstand. Then she opened the window and climbed out. The city was colder at night. Faster. She kept to the shadows, her steps unsure but determined. She didn't have a plan, only a memory of a street corner where it all began, of a noodle cart long gone and a bench she had once collapsed on. Back at the hospital, a nurse screamed when she found the empty bed. By sunrise, the hospital director had been alerted. Security footage was checked. David's phone rang just as he stepped out of a board meeting. He answered, and everything stopped. She's gone. Within the hour, David was back in his car. The world could wait. The company could wait. But Sonia couldn't. He drove with his jaw clenched, his mind racing with images of her alone, scared, walking the streets again like she had nothing to lose. This time, he wasn't going to let her disappear. Not again. Under a flickering street lamp, Sonia sat on the cold pavement, clutching her knees to her chest.
Somewhere nearby, a car door slammed, footsteps echoing on the wet concrete. Then a voice, familiar, steady, and full of ache. "Sonia, please don't run from me." The city glowed around her, but Sonia felt invisible again. She sat on the cold pavement beside a shuttered food stand, the same spot where she had first seen him. The cart was gone, replaced by a boarded-up kiosk, but she remembered it like it was yesterday. The hunger, the fear, the trembling in her voice when she touched his arm and whispered, "Please, I need help." And he stopped. And everything changed. Now, she was back. But this time, she wasn't begging for food.
She was trying to hold on to the only thing that had made her feel whole. Her breath fogged in the air. She curled her knees to her chest, arms wrapped tight, her heart pounding like a warning drum. Why did I leave? Why does it still hurt so much? Her head lowered, her eyes stung. She didn't hear the car pull up, didn't see the door swing open, didn't hear the footsteps at first, but she felt the stillness change. And then his voice, calm, low, shaking with something heavier than fear. "Sonia." She looked up. David stood under the dim streetlight, his face pale, his eyes locked on her like he just found a missing part of himself. She flinched, unsure what to do. Her instinct told her to run again, but he stepped forward, slow, careful, and knelt in front of her. Not as a billionaire, not as the man in the papers, but as the one who had listened, sat, stayed. The one who brought her books and fruit and a necklace she never took off. "I don't care if you run," he said softly. "I'll still be here." Sonia blinked. He meant it. She could feel it in his voice, in the way his hands stayed loose by his side, not grabbing, not forcing, just waiting. "I didn't want to go," she whispered. "But they were going to take me. I know. They were going to put me somewhere far. Somewhere cold. With people who smile like it's a job." David's eyes glistened. "I wouldn't have let that happen. But you're David Cole," she said with a bitter laugh. "You don't get it. You're used to people staying. I'm used to being moved." He leaned closer, lowering his head so she'd see he meant every word. "You don't have to move again," he said, "because I'm not going anywhere." Sonia's lip trembled. "I don't know how to be in someone's life," she admitted. "Every time I try, they leave. Or I do." David's voice cracked. "Then let's try together." And that was it. The wall broke. She leaned forward into him, sobbing into the shoulder of the man who once sat beside her without a name. His arms wrapped around her, tight, steady, real. He didn't promise her forever. He didn't promise things would be easy. But he was there, and that was enough. The ride back was quiet. She sat in the passenger seat, still wearing the hoodie with sleeves too long. David drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near hers on the console, not touching just there in case she reached. She didn't speak until they turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Home," he replied. "To the hospital?" He shook his head. "No, my home, if you'll have it." She looked at him, tired, hopeful, and for the first time, safe. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. David opened the front door to a warm, softly lit apartment overlooking the city skyline. As Sonia stepped inside, the smell of cinnamon and clean linen wrapped around her like a blanket. And in the silence, she whispered to herself, "This feels like a beginning."